4 times. We did have monitors come out and observe productive lab and see what was happening and see what kind of skills were being learned and see what kind of activity was happening, interaction with the trainer and the participants, and how that was being delivered. I'm excited about the idea that monitoring is going to return, because that is going to provide the opportunity to see what's going on and where it's working well. Thank you.
Really raises the bar. Thank you, Rocio. Appreciate those comments. Juliana Kirby, you're next.
Thank you. We also have been around since, the dawn of time as it relates to all the history of SOST and productive lab and all of the research that was done and group thinks and things that we've been through. So this issue has been around a long time, and we don't get to see obviously every project, and we don't study everybody's curriculum to look at what they've got for productive lab. So I wasn't quite sure where the heartburn was coming from at this time, but certainly if somebody's including something like, cleaning a restroom, that doesn't seem like ETP eligible training, regardless of delivery method. But what we've come across sometimes with employers is the language can be confusing. Sometimes people think when it's one-on-one training that's equivalent to OJT or something like that. But what we try to do is tell employers that, really productive lab, that kind of technical on the job training and live production is really specific to certain industries. It just doesn't apply in if you're an insurance company, you certainly don't have equipment that you need to train on. So it really lends itself to manufacturing, which is where I think this, all started, is that it was to allow manufacturers who sometimes you just have to train, especially if they're small, they don't have they don't have money to put people in classrooms. They only can hire someone and put them right on the floor with, a mentor, let's say. So I would say that we also maybe put some framework around the use of productive lab based on the industry that it is. There has it's not easy to get productive lab approved. You do have to write an exhaustive justification. There is downward pressure on the number of hours. I don't think anybody, I can't speak for everyone, but I don't know that people would mind a different reimbursement rate. People are used to tiered reimbursement rates. So I think that there are some things you can do if you're trying to limit it. But again, not every company has certifications, not every, so I want to make sure that you still keep some flexibility as to the application of productive lab based on what the employer's needs are.
Thank you, Juliana. Appreciate those comments. Jill Mewison, you're next.
Thank you. So I understand where you're at with concerns. And I'm another one of those people that's really glad to see monitoring coming back so that staff can see what's happening in the field. I do have a couple of comments, and I think that enhanced justification is a good thing. I think it's very tough to limit and say this industry or this industry or this industry, because what happens, on the work floor can be different. Based on different types of industries. Just I don't necessarily agree with priority industry NAICS codes the way we do that, because I think that there are other industries that should be included. So my point is, I think it's tough to broad brush that. I also will make one point. I agree with higher wage jobs, along with productive lab. I get that logic and I agree with that reasoning. These are not my projects, but I would throw out there that different students, different trainees learn in different ways. Not every student learns well and best in a classroom environment. And I think that is something that should at least be considered. And that could be explained in a deeper justification, deeper explanation for justification. And I hadn't heard that, so I did want to have you think about that. And that's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Jill. Any other members of the public? There's 138 of you that would like to give some input. Please raise your Zoom hand or hold your peace. Okay, we're going to return things back now to the panel members or the committee members for additional discussion. I'll I'll start of lists. Heard certifications a few times. That's one of the things I would like ETP to ask about, specifically related to Productive Lab. I understand, as some of our other members of the public have stated, that not all Productive Lab training will have a certification, but where that is included, that is a huge benefit to the worker to be able to transfer that skill set by paper to better their careers. So that's something that I would like to see us pursue. The other thing that I get a little frustrated with, and it is related to wages. So if the wages are very low and their classroom based instruction reimbursement rate is higher than the wage that the trainee is getting, and I understand from the other member of the public that it is to help offset the cost of the trainer as well. It's a red flag for me on that. So related to that, when we're doing the justification for Productive Lab, which is creating a profit for the applicant and the contractor through the training itself, I'd like to know what the wage progression is for that trainee. If they're going to be successful in the Productive Lab after so and so many hours of creating a net positive or product for the contractor that they're making a profit off of, what's the good for the worker? And are their wages progressing as they're receiving this training? And if so, how much, when, etc. So those are the questions that if we don't ask them outright, you're going to hear me ask them a lot more often during panel meetings. Those are the top one feedback that I had. Jan or Rick?
Yeah, so just to go back to Productive Lab, unfortunately, what's happened, and some of you may or may not been aware of what the panel has been looking at over the last several months, it's just gotten way out of hand. And I think people have just been taking advantage of Productive Lab. And as there are reasons for that, as I mentioned. And so what happens is not every company, it's been maybe a few contractors, it could be a few employers, but what that does, it sends a message to everyone, unfortunately. And I hate to see that. I mean, if you look at the training curriculum under Productive Lab, I mean, it is nothing what the intent of Productive Lab was supposed to be. And now they just generalize it by saying, standard operating procedures, that's Productive Lab. That's not specific enough for a panel to evaluate what is or isn't Productive Lab. So the titles of your training curriculum under Productive Lab have been very poor. And it doesn't give us a good feeling that it's being used in the intent it was meant to be. And so that's unfortunately, that's why we're talking about this. I wish we weren't talking about it, because there is a reason for Productive Lab, but now I think that, like I say, people don't want to pay the overtime. They don't want to, they're shorthanded. They put everybody on the floor. Maybe it's not a one-to-one. They say it's a one-to-one, but hey, I've been there. I know that it always can't be a one-to-one. That person has got to be dedicated to that one person that's doing Productive Lab. If they have 300 hours of Productive Lab for 300 employees, I don't know where they're going to get their trainers. It just seems unrealistic. So that's what we've been seeing. And those who spoke today, I appreciate your comments and your concerns. And maybe you have legitimate concerns around Productive Lab, but unfortunately, that's what we're seeing as panel members. It's not what the intent of Productive Lab was. So whether there's going to be more questions on the application, more justification, whatever it is, and scrutinizing it more. But as I've thrown out earlier, hey, just for an easy fix for both staff and panel members, we don't scrutinize what you do around safety anymore. We just say you got 10% of safety training, even though some of it may be mandated. We say, okay, fine, you can do that. Maybe that's something we need to do. I don't know. And the rest of it would be on your own dime. That's all I'm saying. I just throwing that out to make it simplified. That's all.
Looking at lists, and this is probably a more applicable question for Reg. If a contractor comes through with Productive Lab as part of their curriculum and opponent, do we have enough staff to be able to go in and monitor that Productive Lab after they're awarded the contract? kind of like, if you're going to ask for it, you're going to get monitored. You better make sure that you actually needed it.
I mean, yes, we do have staff, of course. We have all of our 4 regional offices plus our program projects unit, so we do have them. However, some of our units are short-staffed. We're trying to hire people right now.
Mhm.
So that's one complication. Another complication is the fact that we keep getting additional general fund dollars,
Hmm.
which is then making our contracting capacity, balloon, which then makes the development workload also
Mhm.
balloon before they even can get to panel. And then when you combine that with being short-staffed, it's a little bit of a nightmare right now. We are trying to hire. We've been hiring diligently. And as I said, the goal is to have much more monitoring and go back to a little bit more of standard practice. I think we're having trouble finding a sweet spot with that right now. Reg, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I'd just say also what comes to mind is that the prevalence of productive lab in the applications is a lot higher than in the past, which is actually to Jan's point, and then in response to your question, Gretchen, which then turns around and says we have a higher percentage of our contracts that we let out in any given year with productive lab in it. So it might not be the scenario that we want to go down, where we're trying to figure out whether or not we can build the capacity to just monitor 100% of every productive lab contract with productive lab in it, but rather maybe put some guidelines or frameworks around the productive lab environment, and when it's acceptable for the panel to say we'll dedicate funding towards it versus when you may use it for in-kind contribution.
Mhm. Very good. Diana?
Thank you, Gretchen. I also wanted just to kind of bring in a little bit more perspective with regards to productive lab, not only what Liz touched on with regard to just the issues with COVID, and even when there is the transition phase that we're going through now, companies are as well, as far as allowing folks to come on site. So that's one thing. But even before COVID, monitoring productive lab wasn't so seamless, because unlike a classroom training where it's scheduled, then we can schedule to be there to monitor and observe that training. Productive lab is a little different because it's actually while production is going on. So just short of, sometimes we're like, oh, so how do you do productive lab? They can certainly demonstrate to us how they do it, but it's not going to be this seamless way where we can just walk in and say, hey, let's see, what's going on with your productive lab today. It doesn't, practically, it just doesn't work that way.
Like that. Okay. Thank you for that suggestion on my part. Phil, you have your hand raised. You've already spoken once. We do have a 3-minute limit. We'll just
Okay, I'll
come
just
on.
make it quick. Diana Torres and I had to gown up and go in and schedule a view of an SOS or an OJT back in the day, and it's a lot to ask an employer to do that, because she's right. It sort of happens at the right time, and scheduling it is a different thing. But I'll just say the last 3 things. Gretchen, I completely agree with you, is that if you're going to get productive lab, you should be paying your employees more than $23 an hour, and you should have a progression. There should be a certification of skills that can be given to the monitor, and that only the occupations that are manufacturing should participate in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz, following up on Jan's comments earlier, if we limit productive lab for any application to 10%, for instance, just like OSHA, does that require or trigger a new rulemaking and regulation development, or we could just?
Yes, it would. Anytime you apply a rule across the board,
Mhm.
it requires a regulation.
Okay, so
That's
what are
pretty
our
much it.
options? Okay.
So, I mean, our options are, without having to change the regulation, our option is to beef up the justification however we want. because, you know, that's allowed for the regulations right now.
Mhm.
And then have panel drill down as much as they want in the panel meetings. You know, for on a case by case basis for each project, so that you can look at each project on its merits
Mhm.
and look at the justification that was provided, what courses are being provided, how many hours of training are being provided, and then make your decisions that way.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to us making a decision right now that will require a regulation change. That's fine. If we want to, you know, lower the reimbursement rate or cap the hours or, you know, something like that. I just want everyone to be aware that if we don't change the regulations, we've then made an underground regulation. So that's the only, you know, thing I just want everyone to be aware of.
Gotcha. That's when General Counsel Michael Cable will jump on you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm okay with not limiting the 10%. I don't want to go through all of the regulation changes. However, if you do, you know, involve more, the staff reviews the productive lab a little more closely. I think it was just a wake up call for all of us when we looked at the productive lab that it was getting out of hand, and we just want to kind of reel it back in a little bit. And you know, one of the things that is a big concern of mine is when I see forklift training as productive lab. Now, for me, forklift training is mini forklifts in a manufacturing facility or in a warehouse. There's no way you can do one-on-one training with the forklift. You can't be on the forklift with the trainer. And you know, it's very difficult. Now, you do get certifications, but usually forklift training is done like off-site, and they move boxes around, they change batteries, they, you know, do some, you know, lifting of the forks and moving into a rack and stuff. But I don't call it productive lab. It's not where actually they're loading trucks at that point, because it would be very difficult to do that from a productive lab standpoint. And I saw that quite a bit on the productive lab was forklift training. So that to me is not, it gives me a little squeamish to think that there's a lot of trainers running around with 10 forklifts and 10 trainers, and it just doesn't make sense to me. It's not, you know, visibly doesn't look right to me. So those are kind of things that, you know, you just need to think to yourself when you're putting, you know, looking at these applications to determine what is really productive lab and what isn't. And then maybe that would suffice, you know, that would suffice the panel to say, you know, this looks good, and, you know, I agree with that, and I think it's needed, and the wages are good, and looks like you got certifications and whatnot. Yeah, that to me is important. Now, I didn't even mention productive lab at the last panel meeting was because the productive lab was very minimal. It was down to like, you know, 10, 15, 20% of the whole contract amount. I didn't dial down too much into the training curriculum, I think, except for Jill. I mentioned to her because she was up there at the time. But for the most part, I, you know, just wanted to kind of give everyone's a heads up that it got out of hand. It's not what it was intended to be. And we need to get it back to what really productive lab is, because there's a real need for it. There's a real need for it in high technical businesses. It's there's no other way you can do it. You have to actually have somebody there, you know, helping you out running the machinery from in a productive and safe manner. So there is a need. It's just, I think it got out of hand, and that's, you know, it's just kind of wake up call, I think, for all of us. So
Share all of those sentiments, and the last panel meeting was mostly focused on the apprenticeship ones, and then I mean, they do on the job training every single day, and they're not doing productive lab. So
I know.
don't do that, apprentice coordinators. I know you're listening. So I think with that said, Liz, is that enough guidance for you? Like, I would really like, under the justification as we're moving forward for the applicant, if they're using productive lab, to have to list out like what certifications are coming with this, what is the wage progression. I will be able as a panel member to see if they are paying their trainee more than what the reimbursable rate is. So you don't really need to do that, but it's important to me of like, if they're receiving this training, are their wages progressing?
Yeah, so I'm hearing that you guys want a better justification
Mhm.
So in addition to asking if they're earning any certifications or what their wage progression is there anything here that we used to ask that you would like for us to ask again? And I'm especially thinking about the task and competencies checklist for each course. So if they say, you know, we're going to train Productive Lab on, now I'm just going to make up, you know, like the widget machine. You
Sure.
need 8 hours of Productive Lab on the widget machine, and you're going to get a certification at the end of the widget machine training, and you're going to have 2 hours of safety training on the widget machine and 2 hours of these settings on the widget machine. And, you know, if they explained what was happening, and then the training hours would just organically come out of what the task and competencies checklist would show. And we can even include those task and competency checklists as an attachment in the proposal
I like
so that you could see them. Is that something, or any of these other questions that we used to ask but didn't ask? Maybe why is Class Lab not sufficient, or any of these other old questions would you like added back in?
So we're all looking at page 4 of your memo, and the one that jumps out to me is for them to explain how will the training differ from actual work.
Okay.
I think that might be, you know, placed in a language that more of our applicants will understand a little bit better, so then they won't think it's laboratory work or so.
Okay.
Jan, Rick, anything else?
No, I think, you know, I don't, you know, want to, you know, just like you say, answering a bunch of questions is just drilling it down. But it's more of just, you know, having the staff look at the Productive Lab requests pretty carefully and, you know, ask them some questions like this and say, you know, it's got to be really a legitimate type of reasoning behind Productive Lab. I mean, I know, I don't know if you recall, but there's been many contracts we've seen or proposals we've seen where they wanted their whole training to be Productive Lab. This was years ago, and it was a packing house. And they said, they got to pack peaches, and we're going to train them while they're packing peaches. And we want all of our training to be Productive Lab. That wasn't a go. And so that's kind of where it was at one time. And I think that was probably why we got rid of the SOST training at that point. So it's just a matter of now it got to a point where everything was included in Productive Lab, and that's not what it was supposed to be. So I just want to really say this is a wake-up call to it, and just let's get it down to what it was intended to be. That's it.
Yeah, it shouldn't ever be, you know, in the application development, a check mark of like, yep, we're gonna do. Productive Lab.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. Yeah.
That's what it feels like for us too. I shared Jan's sentiments on this. So.
Yeah.
Okay, Rick, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, and anything over, like, you know, like Jen was saying, anything that pops out at us like over 40 hours of Productive Lab or 60 hours just draws a red flag for us and needs to kind of be better explained and dialed in and have the wage progression and the certification. That's perfect.
Yeah, I think all Productive Labs should have to do that, and I think we'll start to see some changes on this. Okay.
Okay, so let me I want to make sure that I have my takeaways, okay? So we're gonna beef up the justification for Productive Lab. We're going to ask if they are earning any certifications through Productive Lab. We're gonna ask if there's wage progression after they finish Productive Lab.
And I don't want it to be yes. Like,
You want what and when and
Elaborate.
how much and,
yes.
okay. And then, do you want to have them explain how it's different from actual work?
Mhm.
Okay. And then, the only thing I'm thinking is, like, yes, I think everyone agrees that the justification has to be, you know, better. I'm just wanting to get some additional guidance for staff. And here's the thing, like, if we don't ask the questions in the application, then staff has to do a lot of follow-up back and forths and everything. So if there's additional things that we want to ask, I would like to have it, you know, have that guidance for for staff there and for the customers so that they are aware of what kinds of questions are going to be asked. Because if we just say, well, you need a better justification, do you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's just a little bit open-ended. So that's why I was thinking about the task and competency checklist, for example, or something else that can give not only you guys, but also staff and the customers a little bit more guidance of what we want in the justification. What will show like that restroom cleaning is not productive lab, for example, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. Well, what I've seen in different applications coming before panel is where they're listing productive lab and then they don't list the trainer. That's kind of a red flag for me. So it's kind of connected back to your justification and clarification on who's doing the training and why, and are there certifications, and, you know, kind of defining that training a little bit better.
Okay. So you would like maybe, in addition to the certs and wage and how it's different from work, some more information on the trainer and some additional information on the actual curriculum of the course itself, so that you can make an assessment of if that particular course
Right.
is a good PL course.
Correct.
I like that number 11, description of training assignments, including training types and course titles. And list the competencies and the hours required for each. I don't know if that's too much.
Well, we have an old document that was called, I think it was called the Training and Competency Checklist. It's still floating around, so it's not like we'd have to make up a complete new one. We have a template that we could adopt and include it, but I just need you guys to tell me if you want us to go back to that practice or not.
It's almost like it's a mixture of the two different lists of questions.
Yeah.
Refining that. Then people are going to not be so encouraged to do productive lab if they have to do all this paperwork and answer all these questions.
Right, exactly, because we don't want to make it too
Unless they really
cumbersome.
need it.
Yeah.
It's really
Okay.
applicable. Robert Singer, you have your hand raised and you already spoke, so to keep that in mind, please. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah. So the issue with that is, I mean, if we make this too complicated, the projects that need the funding, you don't want to just put them through more red tape and get them frustrated. That's not, I don't think, what we're trying to do here today. If you have a project that needs a productive lab and it's a good fit, I don't think we want to make it too intense. It's a pretty intense process already. It's just, I think you're letting projects through that maybe aren't deserving of it. So I want to point that out. And then for like apprenticeship programs, do they have to go through this whole process as well? Or is it just?
They're
just
not
a
receiving
few-
productive lab,
Apprenticeship programs never do productive lab?
not to my knowledge.
Okay,
They're getting the classroom-based reimbursement for the classroom hours that they have at their apprenticeship program. And when they're on the job doing their training, they're not asking for productive lab.
okay. How about in the private sector, I wonder?
It's a good
It
question.
might be different. All right. So the other thing with productive lab is for multiple employer contracts. Sometimes we don't know. We know the companies that are interested in doing the multiple employer contract, and they're going to do some productive lab potentially. So for multiple employer contracts, just remember, it's going to be hard to be specific. And now it's very hard to change a productive lab contract because because of it's hard to change between job groups and other things. So for multiple employer contracts, it's going to be a little trickier. And I just want to ask for some increased flexibility for the multiple employer contracts, or you could cap them at a certain amount if you don't feel comfortable. But it's a little bit harder on the multiple employer contracts side to predict what those employers are going to be doing for productive lab training. Thanks.
So Rob, I never see a productive lab on MEX. So when does that occur? I don't.
When the application goes through, they're sometimes very limited. And on ours, it's very limited. It's under 60 hours per employee, and it's very limited. But it's in the curriculum often.
I just don't see them all, mostly all single employer contracts. I don't see them usually on MEX. So.
Yeah, because you got like small CNC shops, like a Tri-Tool or something.
Yeah.
They need to do it more than anybody else because it just they don't have enough employees to fill a full classroom. they have very specific equipment and they need to have one-on-one training. They've done the classroom piece. Now they need to do some productive lab training to reinforce those skills with hands-on training.
Yeah, so just, Rob, just so you know, I mean, you can kind of oversee that. I mean, you can talk
Yeah.
to them about it. So, I
Yeah.
mean, as soon as you know, I mean, you're a responsible, contractor, you would know how to handle that. I'm just saying that I think the employers, to a certain extent, really didn't even know what they were signing up for. And so I think it was that's where I think we kind of we had a disconnect between what was being done and what
Sure.
they knew was being done. so to
Definitely,
speak.
definitely. I've seen that at the panel as well. Definitely.
Yeah.
And Liz, during the application process, are the applicants receiving kind of like a solid definition of productive lab, or is there just still confusion?
Technically, well, that's interesting. When we used to have what was called a preliminary application, that was to determine eligibility and then what kind of funding the company was eligible for. That was completed first, and then once eligibility was determined, it went to the field office for development. And then the field office worked with the contractors to help them develop their applications. But last year we changed to combine the preliminary application and the application together into one step in the new computer system. And so now they are turning in their applications before they have any contact with staff at all.
Oh.
And so they're not getting as much hands-on help with that. And I don't know off the top of my head if there is like a help bubble or something in the system that provides a definition of productive lab.
Might be something to follow up on.
Okay.
Perfect. Annie Rafferty, Butte College, go ahead.
Hey there, good afternoon. I just wanted to second what Rob Sanger was talking about with the MEX. We do have particular projects with employers that evolve during our contract period as we learn more about a particular skills task or, a simulation that as colleges we're trying to replicate in a non-productive environment. And so oversight of that and compliance with this that has been discussed today doesn't seem, too far beyond what we are doing already to ensure that it's aligned with the spirit of the skills training that we're intending to develop, because sometimes it could be new equipment that doesn't exist yet, and so we're trying to figure it out with that employer in a customized delivery. The second is there are different industries outside of manufacturing that are evolving with our work, in particular with on the utility side, where there is an 18-month compliance and not so structured training that our state faces right now. And so how we're doing our work together with the colleges and ETP and those contractors is evolving. And so some of that productive lab, as Jan, you remember going through that with that particular employer of what are the tasks that are being performed for that skills training. So we're holding a tight leash on it, I guess is what I would say. But it's important that having that flexibility when we're working with newer industries that we haven't worked with to be able to solve whatever skills training it is with that employer together and be a good partner with that. And I think that the description of the training assignments and some of the justifications are valid and important for the spirit of what we're trying to do.
Great. Thank you, Annie. Liz, do you need anything else from us at this point? You're muted, my friend.
I know I clicked it and it disappeared and it didn't unmute. It's like, yeah, okay, so we're going to add questions about certs, wage progression, specific information, not just a yes. How does productive lab differ from work? More information about the productive lab trainer and a little bit more about the curriculum, but maybe not as detailed as the checklist, task and competencies checklist was before. And then the only other question I have is if we want to ask different questions of MEX and single employers, since the MEX are requesting more flexibility on this.
The questions that we are asking of them don't seem that outlandishly hard to answer, for me at least.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jan, Rick? Okay, cool. We are going to move on to the next item on the agenda as soon as I can figure out how to save and close out of this PDF. Okay, next item on the agenda is a action item, item 5A, proposal to committee regarding workforce literacy pilot guidelines. And Ilya, are you on here?
I'm here.
There you are. You're presenting.
All right, thank
Hi.
you. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, are you able to see that?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for allowing me to present this. So today, what I will be presenting is a new item for ETP. It's a workforce literacy pilot program, specifically the guideline for it and how we're going to implement this and what it's going to look like. So basically, ETP received $10 million in one-time general fund dollars. This is in addition to our normal funding. And we do have a regulation, 4451, which does allow us to create guidelines for alternate funded programs such as this. And those guidelines will dictate how that program goes along. And while I was working to draft these guidelines, I solicited feedback from multiple people and organizations, many of them who are either doing this type of training or they are looking to do it. So a lot of the guidelines were informed by those conversations as well as additional research. So today, I'm hoping to kind of have a discussion and dialogue on these guidelines, as well as at the end of it, to have a recommendation to first solicit feedback, and then from there, requesting an action item for a policy committee to vote to either approve the guidelines as they stand or with any potential changes out of the discussion, and move it then to our October panel meeting for final approval so that we can move forward with the implementation. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the document here for the guidelines themselves. So the purpose of this program is fairly straightforward. The idea is basically to train immigrants, refugees, and English language learners, and only those individuals, and to train them for certain literacy type and some technical skill training. The types of training, and I'm going to scroll down and we can go back and forth once we have the discussion on this. So I'll start with the trainee eligibility. So it's going to include incumbent workers, newly hired workers, seasonal workers, unemployed individuals who are looking to get employed, and specifically for immigrants, refugees, and English language learners. Based on some research that I did, we do have a definition here of what constitutes an English language learner. Ultimately, it's kind of someone who it's their second language. They're not too competent with it and need some literacy skills training.
Ilya, can I have a question on just that? So do they have to self-identify that they're one of those three candidates, or how does an employer know that they're one of those three candidates?
So we're, for the purpose of the guidelines, how we have it set up right now is we are asking contractors to self-certify this. So it will be on the contractor to determine who meets this requirement. So different entities may have different ways of making those determinations, but for ETP's purpose, we're allowing them to self-certify.
So they don't have to bring any kind of documentation whatsoever to tell them they've got 15 immigrants, 2 refugees, that it's just going to be them to make that decision. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And then so for the specific type of training, I'm going to go down here. Like I said, this is a workforce literacy fund program. So the literacy is the main topic. And I did go ahead and make sure that we defined what literacy means, what literacy skills are, and the different components that could make up that, as well as a few other training types that I learned about along the way. But basically, literacy means an individual's ability to read, write, and speak English, compute and solve problems at levels of proficiency necessary to function on the job, in the family of the individual, and in society. So for this purpose, we are focusing on English literacy, digital literacy, so being able to use technology even just at the basic level. We also added in workforce preparation activities. Oftentimes these are called like soft skills. These were something that was indicated as something that's important as a component, but not the primary purpose. And then technical skills, which are a bit more broad for job-related focus. One of the things with this program is at least 70% of training hours in this program do need to come through as literacy skills. So digital literacy or English literacy, with a good significant portion dedicated to English literacy. So the workforce preparation and the technical skills will be complementing. And we're also looking where some of the programs, they actually complement the technical skills and the English or literacy skills into kind of one program where it's maybe English skills related to the specific job that someone is in or trying to get hired in. Then for our eligible contractors, sorry, I think they're up here. So because this is general fund dollars, there is no requirement for being tax rated for unemployment insurance. So we can actually open the gates to allow anyone to come in. And since the goal is to train those specific trainees for those specific training types, we don't really want to limit who can come in here as long as they're able to meet those training goals. So we're opening the doors to all of our normal employers, so single employers, MECs, organized labor, community, workforce development boards, etc. We're also opening the door to community-based organizations or nonprofits who are not paying into unemployment insurance. And so I did get a definition that I coordinated with and made sure that it worked for community-based organizations on what that means. But ultimately, we want people to come here as long as they are focusing on the goals of this program.
Ilya,
Yes.
I think one thing that's maybe absent from that definition of a community-based organization, where it states with at least 2 years of experience providing education or workforce development services, but like literacy education.
Okay, thank you. Making a note of that.
Yeah, just kind of trying to weed out of like how they had success of literacy programs for their members. And
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So how is this program going to work? We're going to be utilizing ETP's normal process. So the normal contracting method. It will be with a few changes. So there will still be 2-year contracts that have to go through panel approval. There will be applications to ETP for this. We're going to do the application process a little different, where because of timelines and being a one-time funding deal, we're going to open up an application window that we're still working out the details of when that will be. At the earliest, I would say it would start sometime December 1st. It may be more in the January range, but we will provide more information once we have that. But ultimately, we want to open up an application window where we allow applicants to come in and then review them kind of as a batch, so that we can look at these a little bit more with quality to ensure that it's meeting the goals of the program. Because we are going to have a few different things based on the nature of these trainees. One thing that I did learn is oftentimes the individuals who need this training, they're not making high wages. So if we were to have a high wage requirement, it would basically restrict many of the people who this training is intended for. So unlike a lot of our core programs, wages are going to be kind of a non-issue with this. Additionally, because of that, so we're not looking for the out-of-state competition or any of that. And so with that, we're looking more, what is the purpose of this program and how do we ensure that applicants coming in are going to be meeting that purpose? And so we'll have that opportunity to assess these applications to ensure the ones that are doing what is intended are the ones that are going to be moving forward. And one thing I will add, because I know this is an alternative funded program and we have had some in the past, and it's been brought up several times where I think it was the SEED program, if I'm remembering correctly. I could be wrong, but there was one that required legislative reporting. I can say that the language in legislation does not require any legislative reporting for this one, so we don't have any requirements with that. However, ETP does want to start conducting third-party evaluations, I think in the future across the board. So that we are adding that as an option here. Once we get that up and running, that we may do just a ETP third-party independent evaluation for this program to kind of look at the success, see what we can do moving forward. So from here, there's a lot, there is more information. I don't want to go kind of line by line. Hopefully everyone had a time to review this in advance. So at this point, what I would like to do is open it up first to feedback and comment from the policy committee members and maybe our executive staff. And then from there, open it up to public and the stakeholders. And I'm hoping we can have somewhat of a dialogue. If there are any items, such as you mentioned, Gretchen, about the literacy education, where some tweaks need to be made, then I'll keep that in. And when it goes to the panel, it will be, so when you make your action item here, it'll be approved with those changes in mind. So when it comes to panel, you'll see those changes. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and then let me know if I need to adjust to anywhere within this document.
Okay, Ilya, you got it. Panel members, do you have any initial thoughts or do you want to hear from the public first?
Yeah, I do, Ilya. Thanks, Gretchen. Around the concurrent enrollment. So that doesn't seem very likely that we'd have concurrent enrollment in a core program because the wages would not meet core program requirements. So if the wages are lower, like $8, $9 an hour, they're not going to meet the core program requirements. So having concurrent enrollment seems like it would be much more of a boondoggle than it should be, because it just seems not realistic. I don't know what your thoughts are, but it doesn't seem like we could do that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. So the reason I included that is there are multiple employer contractors and possibly even some single employers that are contracting with ETP through our core programs or even some of our alternative programs. And the type of training for this program is meant to be so much different that I don't want there to be restrictions where they can't come in for this if they have that training population and that type of training just because they have a program with ETP. And you are right that in many cases that it may be a non-issue, but if there is someone who is doing, say, a training for, some kind of job training that meets our core program, but isn't actually literacy, because our normal core actually limits the amount of literacy, but that individual might need a lot of literacy training. I don't really want to have that restriction that does not allow them to just because they were in another one. There still will be, and I put the language in there where I can go down to it. Since we're talking about this. Sorry. I apologize, I'm blanking on where this is right now, but so I did put language in there, so there will be no like double dipping, so to speak, where a trainee will not be able to be in a training for one program and this program at the same time. So it's just really more to limit restrictions in case that there is someone who would meet the eligibility for this training who could use that literacy training, but we don't restrict them just because they're in another program doing a different training. I guess, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I just don't see, it's very likely that somebody would be both in a core program and in this because of, mostly just because of the wage restrictions, but you know, like, as you said, there may be some that pay higher wages in a core program that need additional literacy training. I can understand that, but it seems like it'd be few and far between, so.
I think you're accurate that most likely that will not be an issue. Is just more of, you know, how do we make sure that those who need this training can really do it, was my purpose in that.
But we can run concurrent companies, right? I mean, if one company comes through under a core project, you know, maybe it's an agricultural company and they have wages that meet the core funding, but they have another group of employees that wouldn't have met the core funding but need literacy skills, then they could actually submit another contract. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is built in here.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Rick, do you have anything at the moment?
I'd like to hear from the public.
Okay. Jan, you good to start hearing from the public? Because I do have some additional items afterwards. Okay, we're gonna go start with that. Rob, you had your hand raised first and then you came out of queue and then you came back in queue. So I'm just gonna go with you first. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I just switching over to my phone here. I've got to leave in a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I think it'd be an interesting prospect too for multiple employers like CMTA to apply for this, even though we don't have a lot of skills ourselves working with this population. Our employers do, and we've worked with contractors in the past that deliver this training. So I would, I'd hopefully you guys could keep it open for chambers and multiple employer contracts like CMTA to apply for these funds, even though we haven't had like 2 years experience. Our employers have experience working with this population. They have trainers, we have trainers. I think we could do a good job with it. So I just encourage you to keep it open-minded to the groups that are applying.
They're presently contained within the suggested guidelines. Next, thank you, Rob. Next up is Helen or Helen.
Hi,
Helen. Helen, there you go.
Helen Roth-Dowden from San Francisco Jewish Vocational Services that has a long history of working with immigrant populations. But what we wanted to ensure was if you have these programs that they can work with other contracts. So for example, if you look at some of the startup costs, if you're going to be training Afghani for example, we talked earlier about Afghani refugees in the Bay Area, and there being a huge need for dental assistants. And there are practically none of them who speak Dari, but obviously people have dental issues who speak Dari. So can we use this training in conjunction with another program that would be to train dental assistants? Because when you look at the startup cost for this, if you have to find a trainer and you're going to have to spend like 30% of the cost just to hire somebody who's bilingual, who has the skills, that we want to make sure that we can do this at the same time we can apply for other training programs like your health program that's going to come up next, rather than to silo these off, because you really want to train based on some skills. I mean, one of the examples that JVS has had in the past is we worked with Unlock, which is a big provider in the Bay Area of services for Asian elderly populations, where there were a whole group of people who'd come in from China who spoke Mandarin, but they couldn't pass the RN exam, even though they had, basically bachelors of science and nursing from another university in Asia. So we want to make sure that if we have people that are working as nursing assistants, for example, in a skilled nursing facility who could really become RNs, we could do training that's focused on the language skills, but also on the other skills to make sure that they pass the nursing exam, and their wages would go up from being a nursing assistant at $35,000 to a nurse at $90,000, which is what you want to do. So our main pitch I'm going to make is don't silo these things, allow them to be part of other kinds of programs that you're also supporting. And we're really excited about your healthcare work and this work as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Helen. And Ilya, I believe that it would be allowed to have multiple contracts, as you just stated to Chairperson.
Correct. Yeah. No.
Clarify.
Yeah. No. Thank you for your feedback. But yes, there's definitely no restrictions on that. The goal is for the intended target population to get that training. So if you're offering a program, however you figure out how to do that, that's what we're looking for. And one other thing to add is, because of the understanding of like you were saying, that I learned a lot of these programs, there is a lot of upfront costs. So this program is allowing for support costs a little bit above what we normally allow, so that organizations can get this up and running.
Thank you.
Thank
Mario,
you.
your hand raised?
Yes, I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity around wages from Janice's comment. Starting January 1st, the minimum wage in California is going to go up to $15.50. So across the board, we cannot ever go below that. As a state entity, we would not let them violate labor laws on that front. And just to echo what Helen said, we have heard from our stakeholders when we're engaging on healthcare, where we're hearing that they would like to actually pair up the contracts with a literacy skill contract, where a literacy skill would be the first component to get them proficient in English, to where then they can transition to healthcare, training in healthcare, providing them pathways up, which I can speak to further when we do our presentation later on.
Perfect. A lot of wonderful opportunities there. Thank you, Mario.
Yeah, so Mario, just to be clear, the minimum wage will be $15 an hour. So even this literacy program, they can't pay below that. Is that correct?
That is correct. We cannot violate state labor laws.
Okay, but if they pay $12.50 an hour and they get $2.50 in benefits to make $15 an hour, it still doesn't fly. Huh?
Correct. Yeah. So, and if you look here, what we're indicating is that the California state minimum wage or the local minimum wage, because there are some localities where their minimum wage is higher than the state minimum wage, that is going to be the minimum post-retention wage, because there is no company that can legally operate paying less than that, because that is the state law. So we're going to make sure we're in accordance with that.
Okay, good to know.
And one thing I did want to add to what Mario was saying, and based on the previous comment, is part of the goal and intention of this particular program is building up the literacy, whether that be digital or English or just literacy skills. It's for the population that sometimes they can't get into a regular worker training program because of that barrier. And so this is getting those basic skills there so that they can then move on to a worker training program such as the healthcare, as Mario was stating. So that's perfectly intent with this program.
Excellent. Sarah Miles with UFCW, you're next.
Hi, thank you all. I just want to let you know that this is a really exciting project for us. Of our 180,000 members in California, who include industries like agriculture and food and beverage processing, like meat plants, a significant proportion are immigrant and second generation Californians, and this could be a really incredible opportunity for us and a great opportunity for ETP to improve its serving women numbers, as over 60% of our membership is women. So this is a really exciting project for that, for this, and thank you for taking my comments.
Lovely. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing. Brian Little. There you are. There you go. Nope. Wait.
Sorry. I clicked faster than my computer seemed to be able to understand what I was trying to do. My name is Brian Little. I am the Director of Human Resources Policy for California Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau, if you don't know who we are the largest general interest agriculture organization in California. We have around 30,000 members, and our members produce everything from avocados to zucchini, and everything in the barnyard as well. So we produce your food, and we're happy to do it, but we have ongoing challenges in doing that. The nature of the agriculture we do in California has always been fairly highly labor intensive. And the upshot of that has been that we have been reliant on an immigrant labor force for a long time. That immigrant labor force, or at least the new influx of people, kind of dried up after the '95 immigration bill. And so we're looking at a labor force now that are in their 50s, maybe their mid 40s. They have limited formal education, and they have limited mastery of English. And so we have had ongoing problems in the industry with communication. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time and energy on is trying to provide people who are bilingual in key positions who are able to manage those communication issues. That's one of the reasons why I think we are going to be facing a future. Right now, we have about 450,000 people that work during the peak months in agriculture and about 800,000 people that do some ag work at some point during the year. But those people are pretty heavily Spanish speakers with some limited English skills. They're not all completely not English literate, but they do have some significant limitations. We are going to need to begin upskilling our labor force, and it's hard to cope with technology we're going to need to deploy in the future, digital controls for machinery, things that autonomous machinery, all sorts of things of that nature, in order to be able to make efficient use of a dwindling labor supply, because I think our labor force is going to get smaller and smaller in the next 25 or 30 years. Upskilling people to manage those kinds of technology that we're going to need to implement in order to be able to make our workforce more productive and to frankly raise the incomes of the workforce that we have. We're going to need to grapple with this English literacy problem that we've been kind of soldiering along to get along with for years and years and years. And I think that the program that you all are contemplating here today is a great place to start. And we're very pleased to do everything we can to try to support it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Any other members of the public that wish to speak on this matter, please raise your Zoom hand. Oh my goodness, there we go. Anna, go ahead. I cannot read all of your name.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Anna Negoescu. I work at the National Immigration Forum, and I focus on English language initiatives and more broadly, I guess, promoting immigrant inclusion at the worksite. So thank you, Ilya, for the presentation, and thanks for the opportunity to comment. And really, most importantly, congratulations on making this investment in English literacy for immigrants and refugees. I want to echo Helen's comment, and you know, I think everybody agrees here that it's a great idea to consider integrating these education services, and I would recommend that we go a step further and even prioritize, you know, partnerships with multiple stakeholders that are working together to upskill immigrant employees. You know, obviously both English and digital literacy are critical on-ramps to certifications and licensing programs in all industries. So thank you for considering that. And then also, Ilya, if you want to go to where you have the training delivery methods listed, we would really love to see a hybrid delivery method explicitly listed there in the curriculum section. I think it's further down where you have curriculum, where you, you know, I think hybrid delivery models are more and more common, right? And they're very effective and have proven really great results. So for example, you know, if there's a program with 100 hours of training and 50 are instructor-led in the classroom or online, and another 50 are self-paced or, you know, asynchronous online learning, however you want to call it, but under instructor guidance, you know, to reinforce classroom instruction and provide additional practice. You know, I think it'd be really good to give an opportunity to those programs as well. And if this model will be listed, it would be great to also address how it would be treated for reimbursement purposes, because I know that there's different rates for computer-based and classroom or electronic delivery training. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. And actually, your comments were encompassed most of my concerns related to this proposal. So I'm really glad that you provided those comments. But Ilya, what about her suggestion to incorporate a hybrid model on that? Is that something that's doable?
So we can definitely include more language for that. I believe, and we can have discussion now, I believe it already is included. So what the computer-based training is an ETP term for self-paced on the computer. Our reimbursement rate for that is currently $9 an hour. So Anna, if that rate is an issue and we want to discuss that, we can definitely do so. But that is our normal rate for self-paced learning. You can see here with this bullet that no training can consist primarily of CBT. I have gotten from my research that in-person learning, especially with English, is very important. However, like your program, there are also many programs who use the self-paced learning method with an instructor maybe checking in occasionally. So it's definitely allowable as it's written right now to allow some sort of hybrid option. Just the main thing to know is that any of the self-paced training would be at that lower reimbursement rate of $9 an hour, whereas the instructor-led training, which can be both in person or remote, as long as there's always an instructor present, and that rate is the $23 per hour.
Thank
per
you
training
for
hour.
clarification. Andre, you have your hand raised.
Hello, yeah, it's Andre with Voxy. I would like to comment that I think it would be nice to add this definition regarding hybrid. And we also, I mean, most of the English online platforms today, they offer unlimited access to the self-instruction component, which you guys call digital. And in our case, we even offer unlimited live instruction. So how does that work in terms of reimbursement? So we need to tell you, like, this given student has studied an X amount of hours with the self-study component and that X amount of hours with a teacher. Is that how it works?
That would, yeah, we would need to know the hours of the self-paced versus the hours of in-person or instructor-based.
Okay, and we will fall under this hybrid definition, right?
Correct. And based on what I was stating earlier, and I'll ask you and Anna, are you still thinking we want a specific call out for hybrid, or based on what I stated, do you think it's sufficient how it's written?
Ilya, I
go
think
ahead.
hybrid would be necessary so that a broader audience can understand it better.
Okay.
We have two of our partners who are already raising an issue. We just need to do a better job of defining that for them.
Certainly.
Also in the
Okay.
chat from Lisa Douglas stating, I did not hear that this would be limited to participants such as seasonal workers. Lisa, I think that's correct. It is not limited to just seasonal workers. Liz Testa responding, this is for trainees who are immigrants, refugees, or English language learners. And yes, they can be seasonal workers, but they do not have to be seasonal workers. Just stating that from the chat because according to some esoteric California law, you're not supposed to chat when you're not repeating everything in a public forum. Mario, you've got your hand raised again.
Yes, I think I didn't do a good job of kind of explaining what I was proposing. When I noticed when I said that we've heard from some of our stakeholders a similar thing that Helena was saying, that they would like to use this as a first step and then from there start enrolling people in another contract. What I'm suggesting here is that perhaps for literacy skill, we waive retention requirements. So that way the trainees can more seamlessly transition from training on literacy directly into training on other job skills on a different contract, whether that's a core project, a healthcare project, or any other project that's ongoing. So that was the, I realized I didn't really suggest that well.
Okay. Related to that, but not related to that, I would like for us to maintain an expectation of retaining the trainee through the program and through the training. So when they come back, if these funds are renewed, of like what was their success for trainees that completed the duration of their program, and how is that success measured? Is there a certification or what's going on there?
Sure. There's not a required certification. However, it is something that is called out to mention if there are any certifications. I know some programs do have certifications. Some of them are industry recognized. And so that's definitely something we want applicants to call out.
Would like to prioritize those ones.
put priority on that, you're saying?
Yep. And, like, really bold that. And then the rest of my remarks or concerns was related to the curriculum, Ilya, for computer-based training. CBT is training delivered through a computer program at a pace set by the trainee. There is no requirement for delivery by a live trainer. This type of training need not be interactive. This type of training is not reimbursed at the class laboratory rate, but at a reduced rate specific to CBT, and no training program can consist primarily of CBT. The word primarily can be used, it's a little squishy of a word. Maybe not the majority of it can be CBT, so it's like a 50% threshold. But my concern is funding programs that are not necessarily providing the best curriculum and success for the individual to obtain and retain English skills. I will put out there, I am a frequent user of Duolingo. I don't want this to be like a contract for Duolingo. So, like, I really do value like that classroom-based training, whether it is online, but with an instructor providing that kind of input to them. And it shouldn't be as easy as downloading Duolingo for I'm sorry, we'll just take Duolingo out of this. An online language app that moves participants through their curriculum, but doesn't necessarily deliver mastery of English language.
Thank you. Yeah, I can definitely change that verbiage from primarily to majorities to make sure that we're in line with that.
That would be great. And then same thing goes, contractors must self-certify that training will only be delivered by qualified instructors who are competent in the subject matter. When they say self-certify, what does that mean?
It means that we're not require, ETP is not going to require from the applicant or the contractor to provide us with some kind of certification or some kind of proof that their instructors meet qualifications. So they're going to be saying, and we do this with pretty much all of our core programs as well, where we're just saying, you know who your trainers are and what training needs to be done. And so you're going to be certifying that. The other option would be we would have to require some kind of definition, more specific definition of what a qualified instructor is, and then require every applicant to provide some proof of that. And then we would have to double check that with all of them. And so
that's where I kind of am, because this is a really specific skill set that you're trying to develop, and somebody that is providing that instruction, I think, should have a background of providing education to English language learners about English language. Like what is it, Ilya, like that's to prevent me from saying, like, I'm going to go teach 20 people tomorrow, and I have no background whatsoever on doing that, but I said I did.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously not by allowing the self-certification, some bad actors or those who are not actually having qualified instructors can potentially come through. We're hoping that the overall assessment would weed out that. But if you want, we can definitely look at like how we can go about bringing that certification in, so that ETP looks at it.
That would be helpful. And I'm laughing because a certain app is pinging me right now. Like they're either listening or it's a reminder. I don't know what's going on. The next person that has their hand raised is Kelly Greer.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking my comments. And I would also like to thank you for creating this funding. As Jan, I've had many careers and many lives in the work world. And one of mine actually I was an ex-ESL teacher in the workplace. And I know how important it is for language to gain for a worker and how that leads to promotion and the ability to just gain better employment. I also agree with Gretchen that it is really, really important that these trainers be carefully chosen. But one thing I will add is that often if these programs have anywhere from 60 down percentage of retention. And what I mean by that is often if an adult learner isn't learning, they're going to drop out. And so if you don't have a good teacher in place, you're going to find these programs fail just because a worker, it's very, very intimidating and hard to learn a second language.
Exactly.
And then also I would like to say, as Sarah Miles said, this is a great opportunity to do a lot of outreach to women. As we know, a lot of the immigrant population that will be training will probably be, women, and in such industries as home care workers and entry-level healthcare. So again, I'm really excited by this funding, and I really look forward to bringing in programs where we have 100% retention, not in the classes themselves, because we've provided great learning opportunities for the immigrant population. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelly. Next up, we have Annie Rafferty again. Brief remarks, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just a brief question. So with some of our programs that we have here with our certified faculty, right, that teach ESL, this is a great program, so thank you for this opportunity. We do have distance education programs, where those distant ed programs give exercises where there is an interaction with a live faculty member that happens, but it's not a Zoom or a live session every single time. There's certain exercises and curriculum and work assignments that a trainee needs to produce, and it's tracked in a different system. And I'm recognizing that in the outlining of the different trainings, we've never really discussed distance learning, like the distance ed model, because it's not CBT where somebody's sitting there self-directed. It's not, X hours with a live Zoom or web conferencing. There's actually a distance education. It is a model that the community colleges use. So just want to put that out there for consideration to discuss at some point, of having a definition of how distance education may fit into a reimbursable model that an employer is investing in for an individual to receive that training through the colleges and other entities that may have a distance education model.
Thank you, Annie. Hillia, does that make sense to combine distance learning into where we reference classroom-based training, of like including distance learning?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sounds like it's almost its own definition based on what Ms. Rafferty was saying.
Kind of, you view a classroom as being online as well and interactive. It's the interactive component that is the defining component, I think.
Yeah, I mean, because we do have electronic delivery, which is basically like classroom, but it's over the computer. But from what I was hearing, the distance learning might combine. It almost sounds like it's kind of more hybrid, maybe, where it combines some of that instructor-based, but also maybe some self-paced. And I don't know if Annie wants to speak more to the specifics on that.
Sure. Different faculty will have assignments that individuals are going to complete. So let's say it's a course that has a rigor where there's interaction that happens with the instructor, and it's based off of the assignments they've completed. And the live interaction that's why they call it distance education. They're posting their assignments and their completion, and the faculty member is providing a grade or feedback on the completion of that assignment. But then there's also integrated during the course where there's live sessions that we call live, right? Because it's live interaction. I can ask a question and then the instructor can respond. And that's our traditional definition of live. But I just think that this invites a conversation or exploring it. And I do think, Ilya, it could be a new definition around distance learning, because it is a complete model within itself that the community colleges and private institutions may use. And it's not a CBT, somebody sitting there going through the traditional CBT, like your app, Gretchen.
Thank you. It's listening to me. Kay, thank you for those additional remarks. Kay Ford, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Gretchen. Southeast Los Angeles County Workforce Development Board. So we are definitely very, very excited about the panel's approach to literacy in the workforce. I think that a couple of things from our perspective, we would want to be sure that in terms of the reimbursable model, that we are clearly defining what is going to be the test for the reimbursement in terms of the retention. So if we are not asking for something like the right to work, how will we check in terms of the 90-day retention if that's what's finally applied, and EDD records? So I guess that's kind of a technicality, Ilya, to look at. If we're, I don't know the intention. Was the intention not to have to worry about the right to work, or is that expected because they're a California employer that will already be understood? That would be the first question. And then the second question would be just to support one of some of what our other colleagues have said, in that a hybrid model would be excellent for a literacy project, in that you consider both the academic side for the literacy skills. Hopefully, I know our employers have mentioned that the literacy skills really need to include the vocabulary of the industry or the sector. So that would need, I think that would need to be promised on in the part of the curriculum, but that there be an allowable practice of the comprehension, if that makes sense. So at some point, there is a reimbursement for the fact that they are going to need to practice in order for us to determine if there's comprehension. So thank you, panel.
Thank you. Andre, you have your hand raised again?
Yeah, thank you. It's really quick here.
I think you're muted.
You muted yourself, sir.
Sorry, thank
There
you.
you go.
I'll be quick. There are several certifications for teaching English as a foreign language, such as TOEFL, TESOL, Delta, CELTA, and many others. Wouldn't it be great to add it as a requirement to guarantee the teacher qualification?
So
Those acronyms, Ilya?
I'm not familiar with those as well. Could you provide a little bit more information on that for me?
Yeah, those are certifications issued by, the likes of Cambridge University and many other organizations that basically prepare English teachers to perform their job either in the US or elsewhere. So those are international certifications that that a teacher will need to have in order to work for many English language schools across the globe. Those are globally recognized certifications, such as, it's equivalent to what a student will get for a foreign student will get for a TOEFL exam, but that's on the teacher side.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm happy to share more information if you need.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I would like that. We can definitely look into that when we're looking to kind of define the what certifies a qualified instructor.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I see no other hands raised. I'm gonna turn it back to Jan and Rick to see if there's any final remarks on that or on this topic. And okay.
Yeah, well, thanks, Gretchen. Yeah, just a couple things. I don't believe we mentioned anything about retention around immigrants and refugees, and not sure if there's going to be any difference in retention with regards to this population. So.
Yeah, so I just went ahead and pulled up the retention section in the guideline. It's fairly standard. I did include, because we do have a seasonal worker guideline that has a little bit of a different retention period, so I did include that as well. I laid out some of our normal considerations for retention, but I know there are other considerations within regulation 4400V. So I'm stating that all those retention requirements will be included. However, I know, and I wanted to bring this back up, I know Mario was asking about the possibility of not having a retention requirement for this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gretchen, but I think you were mentioning that maybe the retention just be on completion of the training program rather than the, 90 days after. So if we wanted to
Oh.
get clarification on that.
I'm gonna go back against what I stated and support what you've included in the guidelines with the retention.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, that clarifies it. I failed to see that, but yeah, I just, I don't know what the percentage is. I was trying to look it up of actually refugees and immigrants, coming into California, but leaving California for other states, or going back to their home state. So I didn't know if that was going to be a problem for retention or what. So that's why I wanted to know if there was any restrictions or anything like that.
It's as it's written now, it's kind of the standard, but if there is any public that have concerns with the retention, I'm happy to hear that as well.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. I just, didn't want to have some performance issues because, hearing that, 25% of my trainees, didn't meet the 90-day retention period. So was just a question that I had. It may or may not be, I just didn't know, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, we want to move, at least I hope we do, move this forward for the October meeting. So I would gently recommend a motion to be made that approves the guidelines with changes to define or incorporate a definition for hybrid and distance learning, a better understanding of the reimbursement rates, and also clarification on trainer experience and certifications as related to qualifications. Does that sound good?
Yeah, let me go through. So the first item was just to add the experience of literacy education in the
For the trainers.
yeah, in that definition for the CBO, I believe.
And certification. Yes, that's the first one. Yep.
And then, yeah, add a hybrid definition, program definition, add a distance learning definition. Are we, and I may have misheard this, were you stating you wanted to prioritize programs that use the hybrid method for this, or not stating that?
I like that idea. I'm looking at Rick and Jan.
I mean, I don't know if we need to prioritize it because everybody's got their own method.
Yeah. But
Okay.
now and then also that they cannot have a majority of the training be the individual one, the computer-based training.
Correct, yeah. So I have changed the terminology to majority from primarily for the CBT, and then there was also the item on wanting to prioritize programs that include certification. And yeah, and then figuring out how ETP will certify qualified instructors and what that certification means. So those are all of the items that I have to change in this. So I guess.
Beautiful. Is there a motion to do all that?
Why don't you make the motion, Gretchen, since you said it all written down?
I think chair people are allowed to make motions, right?
Yes, they are.
And there's a recording of this. So can somebody just read that back? Okay, motion is to approve the guidelines with the following changes. Ilya, you're gonna have to help me out here. First one is, I'm scrolling. That a community-based organization has literacy experience or literacy skill experience or education experience under contractor eligibility. That we will incorporate a definition for hybrid learning, that we will also do the same thing for distance learning, that we will also talk about the reimbursement rates attributed to each of the different instruction styles, and that we will also prioritize and also define trainer experience and certifications as it relates to qualification for delivering the training.
I second that motion.
Sorry, there were a couple other items.
Okay. Okay.
Motion's
let me
still
take that
open.
back.
Go ahead, Ilya.
So there was also the prioritization of programs with certification
Yes,
and changing the term primarily to majority for CBT.
and yes, and that is exactly what I just stated.
Okay.
Through you.
Okay, now I will second that motion.
Perfect. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Whew, thank you very much. This
Yeah.
this is why we have policy committee, is we develop policy collectively with the public. It's amazing. Okay, we're gonna go on to the next item. Proposal action item 5B, proposal to committee related to healthcare pilot guidelines presented by Mario and Diana. Peter, you've got your hand raised. Do you need to something?
Yes, just a quick question. I guess this is for either Liz or Ilya or Mario. Will we be accepting written comment on these guidelines? And if so, when's the last day for the public to submit public comment writtenly, in writing, I should say?
Well, the policy committee meeting will end in about an hour, I guess. And this is going to October panel for approval. So they've already made their motion and they've seconded the motion and approved the motion. So this is going to panel as it is right now. Anyone can send Ilya email with comment whenever they want, but it will not be incorporated into any changes in the guidelines since they've already made their motion to pass it on to panel.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. And now we really are on to the next guidelines. Mario, Diana.
Yep. Mario, you're on first.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me. My name is Mario Masla. Give me 1 second. Let me just make sure I'm sharing the right thing here. Can everyone see my screen? All right. My name is Mario Maslak. I'm a Chief of Program Operations. And today, Diana and I are going to present the guideline for Healthcare Workforce Advancement Fund. This is the memo. I'm going to just briefly mention a few things, a kind of a nickel overview of what we're proposing, and then Diana will go over the guidelines in detail. Governor Newsom's 22-23 budget approved $25 million in general funds for the employment training panel to support job entry and career advancements for entry level and other workers in health and human services. To that end, this is going to be alternative funding to ETP, which, as you know, gives us some leeway in to deviate from our enabling legislation, processes, procedures, and things like that. So we're going to take some liberties with this to test out and experiment with other approaches to our performance-based program. So initially, we were supposed to get $90 million for this program. However, by the time it was passed, we got 25 million. And that just drove us to be a lot more intentional and targeted to make sure that we're having a bigger impact with these funds. Essentially, we're going to target entities that are not generally eligible for our core funding, so they're not eligible for UI. Because if they are eligible for core funding, then they can apply for core funding. So we really want to use this to reach different kinds of employers, CBOs, nonprofits, public entities, things like that. We're focusing on equity and targeting underserved populations to provide them pathways to either career and or wage advancement. In exchange for that, what we're looking at is extending the term. So we're looking for this to be a 4-year term, so a much longer contract than what we usually have. We're looking at a higher cap of $1 million. We're looking at over 400 hours of training in line to our standard contract usually has 200. This with double the time, double the number of hours, 400. with the option of going over that with an advocate, with an adequate justification if they have a reason why they would go over that. Also, with the $1 million cap, what we're proposing is that this can be in the future amended up if they're showing really great performance 1 or 2 years into the program. And also we're building in what we built into the expansion and CCCF, the option for clawbacks. So those who are underperforming, where we can take some of those funds back, gives us that option. So all of that is to say that we really, because the term is so long, it spans almost the entirety of our authority to have these funds. So we want to be able to redistribute them from underperformance to overperformers to make sure that we're getting the best use of funds. Since we're offering such a long term, higher cap, more hours, and the ability to mend up, that's where we're also increasing the performance side of our performance-based requirements, where we would ask for progression. Essentially, we would want to see a benchmark of how much the wages have progressed over the course of training, or that an actual occupation has changed. So we're going to be collecting the occupation at enrollment and the occupation at the end to show that these entry-level, lower skill workers are actually progressing and attaining higher occupations that are paying them a living wage and providing them pathways for advancement. That's sort of the short, quick, nickel-dime overview of this. And now Diana will go in more detail and review the entire guideline with you.
So Mario, I just have a real quick question.
Of course.
Sorry, Diana. So the 25 million, was that, and when it was 50 million, you still had the 4-year or 5-year time period? Or because I'm thinking that 25 million is going to get eaten up pretty fast. I mean, why did you extend it over a 4-year time period?
So yeah, we are expecting for it to be eaten up pretty fast. That's why we're kind of restricting things to specific populations, to specific types of contractors. We're extending it to that longer period because we really want to measure the effect of this training. We really want to give an opportunity to show actual, if we're going to require a progression in occupation, to give these contractors the opportunity to have that length of time where that can take place, where the training can actually be delivered and we can actually observe that there is a tangible change to what the occupation and the skills of these trainees. And we're using this as a test bed that in the future might inform changes to our core program as well.
So are you opening it up for every month window to apply, or anytime apply, or are you just opening up a certain window of applications?
So Diana will go in more detail on that. The proposal is to have several windows, have short windows, because we wanted the opportunity to calibrate this as we go on. So we would open a short window initially, and we would do this in several goes. The intention there is still to get these funds out by the end of this fiscal year, though, which is June 30th.
Okay, very good. Okay, thanks, Mario. Sorry, Diana, didn't want to.
Oh, no, not at all. Just Mario, you want to go ahead and go through the recommendation just to get it for the record?
Oh, yes, the recommendation will be, once this is presented, that we're soliciting comment from policy committee, contractors, stakeholders, staff, and the public regarding these guidelines, and then approval by the policy committee to advance these guidelines to the full panel on October 28th.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Mario. And I'll go ahead and share my screen now.
Thanks, Diana.
Right. Share. Okay, everybody should be able to see that. It's the Healthcare Workforce Advancement Fund. And I think both Ilya and Mario did an excellent job of kind of going over the how and when we receive these funds, and also the authority, the given authority that we have as ETP to disperse these funds as an alternative funding source. So I'm not going to go through those pieces. I do want to say that this is this particular guidelines, they may seem lengthy. They're 5 pages. The first couple of pages, it's interesting because it seems like the least money we get, the less money we get, the longer the guidelines are. So I think I saw Ilya's are 7 pages and his is $10 million. So ours is 5 for 25 million. And yes, we definitely need to put a scope on this. And that is that this was supposed to be $90 million, folks. So we need to look from that lens, and these guidelines are designed with that lens. So I did want to say in the first 2 pages, I do want to be a little bit purposeful and say that mention some language that is in the legislation, whereas these monies shall be made available to support employment training, health and the training of health and social workers. And this funding shall meet the requirements of High Road as specified in the UI section. And I also want to be purposeful to note some of that language and quote, and that is to improve job quality and job access, including for women and people from underserved and underrepresented populations, to meet the skill and profitability needs of employers, and 3, meet the economic, social, and environmental needs of the community. The language of this bill also requires that there be job and wage commitments as a condition of funding. So that's, I did want to be mindful of saying that. On page 2, I'm going to go ahead and go on to that. Like I said, the first 2 pages are pretty much the intent, as well as we start on the top of page 2, which kind of talks about the need for these funds. And then secondly, I'll be able to talk about the intent, and that is basically to meet those needs. When I speak to the needs, as Ilya did, he's talked about conducting a lot of research, and he did a great job of that. And I want to kind of pause and mention Abby Snee from the Labor Agency, who is pretty much a champion through this whole process. This did not start yesterday. This did not start in January. This started, some time ago, because we all know that there is a shortage of healthcare workers, including workers in entry-level occupations. And as we know, there are challenges to filling these positions with qualified workers, and those challenges are sometimes systemic. In addition, there is a need to support a structured and build a systemized strategic career pathways that lead to wage progression out of poverty and into earning livable wages. What that means for me is kind of in a nutshell is kind of breaking that glass ceiling. Because as we know, some entry-level employees kind of stay there. And what we're looking for here is to really be purposeful in funding training that supports individuals moving up those career paths into higher wages, so there's diversity in higher wage jobs. These guidelines are designed to provide a training incentive to reduce the resource challenges, as well as support the development of strategic system-wide career paths and wage progression for entry-level workers. So with that, what do we intend to, what are the intended results and outcomes? And let me scroll down a bit for that. And I do want to remind everyone that these guidelines, proposed guidelines, are on the ETP website. So you can also follow along if I scroll too fast or too slow. So consistent with the panel's goals and identify workforce needs, the intended outcomes of these funds are as follows. And I'm going to go ahead and read them because I think it's important that we start to build an imprint of what the intent is for those prospective applicants, so that they know that what does ETP want to see in the applications, as far as what are the intended goals for these funds and outcomes. Build and create innovative and accessible opportunities to recruit, train, hire, and retain and advance a high road workforce as cited within the U Code that I mentioned previously. Support pathways to quality jobs and build ladders of career advancement opportunity for entry-level and other workers in care, healthcare, and human service social work settings.
train workers for jobs critical to the California economy and the growing demands of healthcare workers, increase economic mobility across health and direct care service sectors to increase inclusivity and diversity in higher paid jobs to achieve equity and wage advancement out of poverty, meet the unique and regional community health and social service needs, leverage a broad coalition of partners in workforce training and community planning, and finally serve, but this is not a finally because this is not an all-inclusive list, but serve new populations in health and human service employers not previously eligible for core fund to expand workforce, build workforce skills, and support career advancement into more highly skilled and compensated roles. And Mario touched that in his comments where this money is very targeted to those employers that otherwise do not meet the core fund requirements. So now we get into the guidelines. So let me just pull this down. And I did want to say that as stated on the bottom of page 2, in addition, these guidelines are consistent with the panel's vision and goals to support future-oriented and sustainable economic development, as well as qualified job training that is equitable and inclusive through strategic partnerships with business, labor, and government. So that's straight out of the panel's mission and vision. So when we get to the guidelines, Mario did an excellent job of recapping, so I'm not going to pause too much because he did an excellent job of explaining some of these bullets. I'm going to go ahead and go through them and then be able to go back to any questions that the panel members may have or the public may have. I can go ahead and scroll back to any of these points. So let's get started. So for funding, as Mario mentioned, the application funding requests accepted up to $1 million. That is not a $1 million cap overall. It is that each funding request is up to $1 million, but individuals can come back later if they can show performance and of course request additional funding. And that will be further explained down. Depending on remaining available funds, the contract funding amount may be increased through an amendment. Current performance will be a condition of maintaining current funding or a consideration for additional funding. Contract conditions will include specified performance benchmarks to retain approved funding. Contracts not meeting the specified benchmarks may be subject to a reduction of contract funding. And that's that's similar to what Ilya mentioned in the literacy funds, where he used the word clawback, and it's the same thing that we have as terms and conditions in our expansion and community college fund as well. These funds will maintain ETP performance-based contract model. All performance terms and conditions specified in the contract will need to be met to earn approved funding. That's pretty standard for ETP as always. Now here is the process. As Mario mentioned, we're going to commence funding in 2023, so that'll be easy. The 2023 wages, which will soon be, which will soon come out. Everybody will know what the wages are. So we don't have them this minute, but we should have them in a couple of weeks. So those will be posted soon. Multiple designated funding rounds until all funds have been dispersed and encumbered. This is great. This gives us a great opportunity to, if there is not enough need in the first rounds, we have the ability to revise whatever we need to revise in the application process. We want to make this more flexible so that we're able to react to any changes in the economy as well, because we don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now. So that kind of builds that into here. Applications accepted only between open and closed application periods. So it's not going to be an ongoing. We're going to have a beginning and an end to each round. And then that will help us manage this fund as well. The contract term, as Mario mentioned, may be up to 4 years. And the contractor eligibility is, of course, health and human service employers not eligible for the employment training tax core funds. and public entities and nonprofit organizations that have elected an alternative method of financing its liability. In short, those that are not eligible for ETP funds, core funds. And it is not contingent on an applicant payment into the employment training tax. I know that that comes up as a question as well. So we went ahead and answered that question in here. And the employers may apply for these funds once per fiscal year. In addition, contractors may also apply for both the healthcare funds and another alternative fund in the same fiscal year. So they can apply for these funds and they can apply for the literacy funds. However, current and past performance will be a factor for funding consideration, and the prohibition on concurrent enrollment will remain. So it's basically, we want to be real mindful as far as spreading out these monies as far as we can, because they are limited. It's, again, not 90 million, it's 25 million. And for as far as multiple employer contracts, things like community colleges that we already engage with, if they serve the above employers, they may apply for a standard ETP core and an alternative fund, including the healthcare funds in the same fiscal year. However, again, past and current performance will be a funding consideration factor. And of course, the prohibition of concurrent enrollment remains. So if somebody has a MEC has a core funding project right now, they're perfectly free to also apply for these funds. But of course, the participating employers, of course, would be different, because the participating employers in their core fund are those that meet core funding. All right. And all other eligibility requirements will apply. Trainee eligibility. So now we say, who are we intending to train? These trainees need not meet UI eligibility. That means it could be somebody that just got out of high school and doesn't have a long employment history. Someone that was formerly incarcerated and could get trained through these funds. As far as the categories of trainees, it could be both new hire, retrainees, including job creation, just like our standard program. And we are specifically looking for entry-level and other workers in healthcare and human service and social work occupations, inclusive of occupations which do not require a four-year degree, with a demonstrated regional and local shortage of workers. And because the shortage of healthcare workers may be statewide, there is some data which shows that there are some specific shortages in certain regions of the state. Some of the occupations include direct care, long-term behavioral health, allied health, health tech roles, such as respiratory therapists and telehealth workers, especially in remote areas, community health workers and social workers. Another one that's not mentioned is dental technicians and hygienists, which show that there is a career progression in those types of jobs. And this is, of course, as far as the settings, typically these individuals work in hospitals, primary care, and community settings. Incidental rule placement rules do not apply. And for those of you who have not worked with ETP, probably don't even know what that means. And that means that in a multiple employer contractor, we do have some limitations as far as where folks can be placed with regards to public entities. We do not have those restrictions in this particular, with this particular funding. Now we talk about training. The type of training that we're looking for is training that leads to career or wage progression, training that leads to retention of healthcare and behavioral care workers, and training that may lead towards licensing and certification. So one of the things I wanted to mention is we're going to probably get a lot of questions about, will you pay for this training? Will you pay for that training? One of the rules of thumb is to always go back to the intent of these guidelines. In other words, is it training that will result in what these funds were intended for? So that should be everyone's guiding light when asking these questions. Training hours, applicants may request up to 400 hours of ETP funded training per trainee. However, they may also request for a higher number of hours on a case-by-case basis with demonstrated justification. And then wages, we are going with the ETP standard wages, as I mentioned, that will be out perhaps in a couple of weeks. And reporting contractors will be required to report wages at enrollment prior to the start of training and at the end of the retention period. This is aligned with our current other alternative funding of expansion and community college funds. Contractors will be required to report starting occupation and the final occupation attained through ETP funded training, because we want to see if there is indeed some career path movement. In the instance where ETP cannot verify wages through existing process, ETP may request payroll information from the contractor. So that's more of a technical point, but just letting everybody know that we will need to get those wages and may seek alternative methods to do so. Record keeping, all training must be reported in the systems within 90 days of delivery of that training. That is also in line with our expansion and CCF funds and is very necessary in order for us to manage these funds with regards to performance. There has to be some job and wage commitments, as I previously mentioned, how training plan meets and demonstrates the above intended outcomes, demonstrated regional and local workforce needs for targeted occupations, describe wage and occupational progression. Priority will be given to applicants with demonstrated wage progression of 10% or more from the start of training to the end of the training retention period. So I loved it, Gretchen, when you mentioned earlier about not just a yes answer, a how answer, right? We want some details, absolutely. And then, of course, under this, putting it into the whole container of, we will be asking for the employer diversity, equity, and inclusion plan or policy. We're not asking people to have it. Most employers have it already, and that is what we'll be asking for them to include it in their application. And then just to finish, if not otherwise specified in these guidelines, ETP program standards will apply. So that is the end, and we can open it up for any questions, and Mario and I will do our best to answer those questions.
Very robust, very informative, very in-depth, loved it all. Jan and Rick, do you have any questions initially?
So Diana, the question is, you talked about MECs doing duplicate applications, but single employers, if a lot of the hospitals come through that are under currently one of our core projects, they would not be eligible for this until their core project was complete?
If they're thank you for asking that, because we do definitely want some clarity in that. If they're eligible for core funding, then they need to continue to go to the core funding bucket. So in other words, this is designed for those that are not eligible for core funding.
Okay. That's good to know. Okay, and then as I was reading through all of this, there's a lot around health, and but I didn't see too much regarding mental health. Now, for me, mental health is a big issue in California. So is there anything to do with mental health here?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's interesting, as I was reading this, we probably should have put the word in there more and more. Yes, it's very clear. It is for behavioral health as well.
Okay.
And just to clarify on that, we've been told to not say mental health, just say behavioral health.
Oh, okay. Is that okay?
I didn't know that either, Jan, until a couple of days ago. So
that's
okay.
the correct terminology. Okay. Yeah, I'm old school, I guess. You just didn't know the new proper term now, but thanks, Mario.
Rick, do you have anything? Or Jan, anything here?
Thank you very much for the great report and presentation, and well put together. Thank you, guys.
Lovely. Are any members of the public desiring to speak on this matter? Seeing no hands raised, is there a motion?
Motion to advance the healthcare workforce advancement funding policy guidelines as presented to the October panel meeting.
Is there a second?
You're muted, Jen.
Oh, there's a hand.
There is a hand.
I second that as well.
Thank you. Seeing that there is discussion, Michelle, Rickner, oh boy, Rickner, and then Juliana, and then I'm gonna go charge my computer before it dies. Michelle, you're up.
Hi there. Can anyone hear me? Everyone hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hi there. Michelle Rickner with Training Funding Partners. Thanks for your time. I just had one question, Diana, about when you talked about trainee eligibility. It talks about how that you want entry-level workers that do not require a 4-year degree. So I'm wondering, does that exclude like RNs? I know you don't have to have a 4-year degree to be an RN, but are they only jobs that don't require a degree, or is that just not a requirement?
Excellent question. I'm glad you caught that. Yeah. So I actually have it here in the third bullet. It's entry level and other workers.
Okay.
And one of the things that is we do want to be purposeful about, and you can always certainly contact me if you have more questions, is what we want to support is entry-level workers progression. So there may be opportunities for that if for training for other than entry-level workers. But again, Michelle, always look back, because I know that you have a lot of clients that you're thinking about. Look back to that page 2 is what is the intent of these funds?
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Juliana?
Hi, Juliana, Training Funding Partners. 2 quick questions. Number 1, will there be any changes be made to the Cal eForce application to accommodate some of this additional information that you're looking for, or should we just make sure that we write it into any narrative sections that are already available in the application? And my second question is, when will you be announcing the application windows?
So we will, this will necessitate a change to our application in the system. So the moment that we just don't want to jump the gun right now and make a request, because we don't know what, if there will be amendments to these guidelines until they're actually approved by the panel. But yes, these additional questions will be added to our core application. Essentially, when the window is open, once you start applying, you'll be able to select, I'm applying for HWAF funding, and then conditional questions will appear, which will, which are specific to the program. And things like collecting the occupation at enrollment and occupation at the final invoice, things that are outlined in this would all be included in our online system.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, and I failed to add at the very end. Thank you so much. And I see Robert, I love that. I see Robert, because I did want to add that the Economic Development Unit will be sponsoring an application workshop. Once the panel approves first this part, the committee approves this, and we take it to the panel. And so we can provide proper instruction and so forth regards to the application.
Robert, you lowered your hand. Are you good?
Yeah, I would actually just add that we're going to plan workshops for both funds, and we'll be reviewing the contents of the applications and the details, but it'll be in the weeks immediately following the approval of the panel to give as much time as possible for potential applicants to review the guidelines and application process and answer any questions ahead of submitting applications.
Excellent.
Thank you, Diana.
Juliana, you still have your hand raised. Are you good?
Sorry, I'm good. I'll pull it down.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other hands raised at this moment, we also have a motion on the table in the affirmative to send these guidelines to the panel meeting as drafted and as presented. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Rick, you muted.
Aye.
There we go. I need that third. Any noes, any abstentions? Motion passes. Perfect. Moving right along. I know some of you are feeling like this is a really long meeting, but the last meeting we had was only 34 minutes in length, so we're making up for it. Item 6 of our agenda is the opportunity for policy committee members to request agenda items for future meetings. Fellow committee members, do you have anything to add for a future agenda item?
I can't think of anything at the moment, so.
I can
Not
think
at
of
this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 7, public comment regarding matters not on the agenda. Are there persons of the public that wish to present us with your thoughts, opinions, concerns about anything not listed on the agenda at this time? Just going to slowly count backwards from 3, 2, 1. No hands have been raised. Thank you very much. And at this time, we can adjourn our meeting and we will see you all at panel meeting later this month.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Oh, yes,
Second.
you need that
And I
motion.
second.
Thank you. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see you later in the month. Have a
Thank you,
wonderful
everybody. Great job.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, staff.